Hello, everyone. Welcome to Greatness Glory podcast, where we teach you methods to awaken your greatness and connect to the glory of your soul. Have you ever tried to get rid of some negative thoughts and emotions, and has it ever worked for you long term? Most people would say that it didn't work. And the reason that it doesn't work is actually different from what you think. Try this for a few seconds with me. Close your eyes and try to not think about a big white bear. A hairy, big white bear. Don't picture it in your mind. Were you able to do it? Very likely no. And the reason is that we cannot get rid of thoughts and emotions by fighting them. And this big white bear actually comes from a famous psychology experiments that proved that whatever that you try to not think about, it will come to your mind more. That's why most of the instructions that are out there, whether it comes from culture or some religious, knowledge that try to get rid of your anger or lust or things like that, it has never worked out because what you push away, it backfires. It becomes more in your mind. You start thinking more about it. I give you an example. In many cultures and religions, they said you should not think about lustful thoughts. You should suppress your anger. You should fight your negative thoughts and emotions like they're a demon or something like that. And you will never find a case that someone was successful to really get rid of those thoughts and emotions. But in the yogic culture, in the psychology, and in the teachings of the great enlightened beings, like let's say Buddha, you will never find a teaching that tells you fight the thoughts and emotions to get rid of them because they knew that it becomes stronger. And if you study the countries and cultures that suppress people's emotions and label them like a big sinful thought or whatever like that, let's say example of lust that we talked about, people are actually more lustful in those countries that lust has been suppressed by the government and the culture and religion. People have in many ways more psychological disturbances because the science of psychology also explains this very well, that when you try to fight your emotions, you try to get rid of them, it brings you down. It creates a lot of guilt in you. You become even more disturbed and you have even less control over your thoughts and emotions. And one reason I talked about this example of lust connects to my own story when I was a teenager, and I was exposed to a lot of those teachings from different religions. I was born in a Jewish family in an Islamic country, and the environment of both family and the country and both religions were like against having those kind of thoughts. And then I got to learn a lot about the real thing, I can say, in the yogic culture and teachings, where there's a lot of talk about controlling your sexual energy to achieve certain goals, because sexual energy is very powerful. The more you channelize it, you can use that energy for certain things, and that's why people become monk. And at that time I was actually daydreaming becoming a monk, and for a few years I was actually trying to do that, to get rid of my lust, and it never worked. And it brought me to reading some psychology books and some ancient wisdom books from yogic traditions that explain that you can never get rid of those emotions, including lust, or if it's something else like anger, by fighting them, but you can change them by transmuting and transforming them. So here's the thing: the answer to get rid of those negative thoughts and emotions is not suppression, and it never works. It's diversion. What do I mean by that? I give you example of my own story again. So after I read those books, and I came to know about a certain technique in yogic tradition, actually, where you imagine your guru, or whether it's Jesus, some divine form, divine avatar, divine incarnation, Buddha, or whatever, that creates higher emotions in you, like devotion, surrender, peace, and those kind of emotions. And then I thought, why do I do this? Like every time I want to get rid of the lustful thoughts, which is completely natural, but when you are on a specific path and you want to accomplish it for any reason, if you want to do it, suppression doesn't work, right? As I said. So I thought, okay, every time that the thoughts come to my mind, I switch it to image of Babaji, whose picture is behind me, a divine incarnation. And in the path of yoga and the Hinduism and those traditions, and even in Christianity and many religions, devotion to God is a big part of your personal development and spirituality, right? So I started doing this. Every time that those feelings and thoughts came to me, I suddenly switched to thinking about divine form that I was connected to here, Babaji, and then chanting a mantra in my mind. And surprisingly, that was the first thing that actually worked very well. Instead of me fighting those thoughts and emotions, I found out that I just changed the channel before those thoughts and emotions get stronger. And here's the principle in both psychology and in mind control and the law of universe, we can say. Whatever you give your attention to it, wherever your consciousness gets focused, more of the same thing will be created within you and without you. And when I say without you, the meaning of it would be something like the law of attraction, which is highly, again, misunderstood and barely anybody understands it, unfortunately. If you keep thinking about something for a few seconds and a minute or so, more thoughts of the same thing will start gathering in your mind. And by doing that, your mindset starts shifting and you become more focused on your goal here. And keeping the supernatural stuff about the law of attraction aside, there's a very good book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, which explains this very well. Teaching of the book is that your mind is like a autopilot system. When you give it a goal and you feed it information about the same thing, your attitude changes, your mindset about how you're living your life changes, and you start automatically being programmed towards that goal. So this is the same thing. When you think about something that you want, when you study about it, more thoughts of that thing starts populating in your mind. And funny example, maybe sometimes you have heard a song and then it was repeating in your head all the time, and sometimes it becomes even annoying to some people and they want to get rid of it, but it doesn't work unless you start listening to a different song or thinking about something else deeply that takes your mind away from that song that is repeating in your head. So these are all pointing to the same thing. So the way to change an emotion is to divert your attention from what you don't want to what you want. Why? Because your subconscious mind doesn't have a yes or no system. Your subconscious mind gets programmed to whatever you give your attention to it. That's why in manifesting your goals and law of attraction and those kind of stuff, again, if you say, I don't want to become poor, I don't want to become broke, and something like that, your subconscious mind basically thinks that you're saying, I want to become poor, I want to become broke. Because you have to switch your mind to what you want, not to fight what you don't want. And this is true both for manifesting the goals and for what you want to think about. So, how would you get rid of the negative thoughts and emotions? By diverting your thoughts and emotions to something that you want. And in the spiritual traditions, in the Sufism, in Gnostic Christianity, in yoga, in those traditions, a very well known path is the path of Bhakti yoga or yoga of devotion. The core teaching of yoga of devotion is that you channelize all of your emotions towards something, high, like a divine form, whether it's Jesus or something else. And by doing that, you kind of channelize all of your thoughts and emotions, and you focus your energy from being scattered. And that makes you powerful. That allows you to switch and redirect the negative thoughts and emotions to something higher. That is a method of mind control. Let's say if you have devotion to Jesus and then you decided that you want to think about Jesus and maybe even chant the name of Jesus as a mantra to keep your mind focused to it for a while, both as a meditation and in your daily affairs. After some time, whenever a negative thought comes to your mind, instead of you fighting it to make it even bigger and worse, you divert your attention to Jesus. And then that gives you control over mind. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something religious. You can also use it with something else, something that especially brings an elevated emotion like peace, joy, something calming, something loving to you. That works better. I don't really know if it works if you divert your attention to ice cream or something like that, but you can try. Now, here is the second part of this technique. It's also true that in most cases, most people are not able to suddenly shift their attention, their thinking from something very negative to something very positive. Like if you were in a state of like fear and panicking, and then I just tell you think about God or something, likely it won't work unless you are really experienced in this and you trained your mind. What works is to gradually divert your attention to a thought that makes you feel a little bit better. And if you want to learn more about this, study the works of Abraham Hicks. They explain it very well, especially in Ask and It Is Given and a few other books. There is an emotional scale, which is a scale of different emotions that we experience as human beings. And the lowest being fear, despair, depression, and the highest being joy, love, gratitude. And the way that it explains it there is that you try to go up the ladder one rung at a time, not to jump from the lowest to highest. And this is the way that our chemistry works. And this is the way that the human mind works. And that's why sometimes the methods that suddenly shift your attention and they are external cause more issues. An example of those things are drugs. If you started smoking some cigarettes and it suddenly changed your chemistry, you become hooked to that trigger and your brain gets wired to that. And every time you feel down, you just subconsciously go and pick up a cigarette to make yourself feel good. But you can accomplish the same thing without an external damaging substance if you learn to find mastery over your thoughts and emotions. So I will just give you an example of how you can do that with the emotional scale thing. For example, let's say you're very angry and I ask you to be just forgiving and loving, and it's not going to work. But if you try to think about blaming your anger on someone just internally, not to do anything externally, or feeling about revenge, it gives you a relief from the sense of anger. And when you have a little bit more relief from there, you can work your way up to forgiveness and, love and those kind of emotions. So that brings me to something interesting again. For centuries, many organized religions that were manipulated by certain religious leaders, they tried to create a lot of guilt in people to control people and say, okay, don't think about this, you're going to go to hell, God will hate you, and all those kind of things. And this way of putting fear in people might work to some extent to prevent people from doing something stupid, but it also creates a society of mentally sick people. And the feeling of guilt is one of the worst feelings that you can experience. A feeling that you're very down and you feel worthless, right? Something is really wrong with you. And a lot of people that unfortunately commit suicides and things like that have a lot of guilt. And psychology explains this very well if you want to go and learn about it. So, what is the way then? The way is to divert our emotions. The way is to create more of sense of peace and happiness and joy within. The truth is, when you feel great, when you feel joyful, you would never want to hurt anybody. Anybody who ever hurts someone, they do it out of some sort of negative emotion, we can say. If you feel oneness with people, with everyone, if you feel really deeply a sense of love, compassion for everyone, which can be created from within by refining your emotions. And that's what all the spirituality and meditation and things like that are about. You will naturally do the right things. Nobody has to come and tell you, don't do this stupid thing, don't get angry. And those instructions from those cultural and religious traditions that tell you just suppress your anger or fight with it is more like this. Imagine you went to a doctor and you told the doctor, I have this pain in my body, and the doctor tries to talk you out of the pain. Try to ignore your pain, try to just fight it, suppress it, forget it. And is that going to work? You might be thinking this is really stupid, actually. And those teachings are not much different. And the difference between some of the ancient, especially Eastern traditions that taught people elaborated methods of self mastery, mind control, and creating inner peace and self awareness versus some organized religions that most people follow and misunderstand, I can say, is this. Those systems give you methods to do it. Those are like science. I have a lot of podcasts. I talked a lot about yoga and meditation. You can go back and listen to those things. And everything that I teach, I try to make it practical. And when you read my book, Art of Balance, which is about creating the basics of well-being and foundation for, real success in all dimensions of life, it's exactly about this, to create that balance that makes everything else is possible. And this technique of diversion, which Abraham Hicks actually calls it pivoting, is one of them. And it's not something that I created or Abraham Hicks created. It's something that's been here forever. It's a part of nature. We just have to pay attention to how things work. If you are experiencing something negative and ask yourself, what is the opposite of this? And try to focus on the opposite, what you don't want will leave by itself. You cannot fight the darkness and get rid of it. You can bring the light and darkness disappears. It's the same thing for the negative thoughts and emotions. One complementary note that I have to add here, which has a lot of both personal development and a spiritual value, is that we have two different ways of controlling the mind. And in yoga, we have investigated the different ways of doing this. And I have an episode about yoga that I explain about the four paths of yoga. So, what we talked about here, diverting your attention and channelizing your emotions, very well can be categorized under the yoga of devotion or bhakti yoga. But that's not the only way, and that's not the way that works for everyone. There is a different way that is transcending the thought process altogether, which means You get to a point after years of meditation and practices that you see your thoughts as a third person with a distance, and they don't really control you and affect you anymore. And you can do it, but it takes years of practice. But something like diverting your attention, it's something that you can start taking advantage of it immediately. But if you go and study certain methods like vipassana, the Buddhist meditation, which is about watching your thoughts and emotions and separating yourself from them, that's a very powerful way that you can learn to transcend your thoughts and emotions, but it needs a lot of dedication again. So, here is one practice to go for this podcast, which I can share with you. It's a small thing to do, but actually works very well if you try it. Catch one negative emotion and just name it, label it in your mind so you can refer to it and remember it. Then ask the pivot question. Say to yourself, what is the opposite of this thought or emotion? What do I want instead of this? Spend a minute or a few minutes working on this. And if you cannot hold your mind on something that you want because it seems too far away or it's not easily believable, try to talk yourself into it. For example, you might have these thoughts, oh my God, I don't have a job. What's going to happen to me? And you're panicking. And if you try to just suddenly shift everything and say, no, I'm going to get the job today. Everything is working perfectly. My life is perfect. It's not going to work. But if you talk yourself towards that thought gradually, it works. That's the emotional scale that I talked about. For example, you could say, well, this has happened to me before and I got out of it. I found a way. This time maybe I can do it also. Or there are different ways that I can address this, or find other positive things that you can think about and give yourself a sense of relief. That's what we're looking for, to find a little bit of relief from that negative thought. Even you can do it on paper. Write some reasons why you think this can work. And another technique which I talked before about it, when you have a negative belief which is strongly controlling you at the moment, something like, oh my God, if I'm not gonna get a job by next week, something horrible is gonna happen to me. You can ask yourself, is it true? Become silent for a few seconds. If your mind says it's true, ask deeply again, am I absolutely certain it's true? And in majority of the cases, you will see that it's not as bad as you thought about it. So these are all different ways of interrupting the cycle of the negative thoughts. Whether you pivot your attention from something you don't want to what you want, or when some strong, belief in the back of your mind is telling you something horrible is going to happen, and you interrupt it by asking yourself, is it true? Is it absolutely true? That gives you a sense of relief and breathing space to help you get out of those emotions and thoughts. And in the book Art of Balance, in the beginning of it, I talked about we being multidimensional beings. We are not only thoughts, we are also body, we are also breath, we are also energy, and many other things like environment affects our emotions, the food and things that we eat also affect our emotion. So if you want to make it even more powerful, take advantage of those things. A lot of time just taking 5 to 10 deep breaths while you're doing that, it gives you advantage of both controlling your energy and chemistry by breathing deeply, as well as taking advantage of those questions or pivoting to change your state. Or you could even combine the breath with some physical movement, like going all the way back and stretching and taking a deep inhalation and coming down, trying to touch your feet and exhale, and do this a few times. And you will see that it's even more powerful. or you could just go for exercise or go to gym or something. These are all the ways that we need to practice to learn more self mastery over our state of being. And I really made it very simple, and I just gave you the gist of what I wanted to say. But if you think about each one of these things that I said and ask yourself, how can I take more advantage of these things and use them? You will find even more ways to do it. And you can even read Ask and It Is Given by Abraham Hicks that talks about this in depth. Very good book. I even have listed it on my website under the recommended books. If you go to greatnessglory.com, you'll find a bunch of books that I find highly valuable on the space of personal development, health, and spirituality. Thank you for listening and have a great day.